So the scale of the attack is really astonishing. If you think about, people went to bed on the 9th, they woke up between 4 walls of fire, and by the morning, so much destruction. Well, my name's Adrian Francis. I'm a documentary film director from Australia originally. I live in Tokyo and I've been here for about 17 years. And I've just made this film, Paper City, which is a documentary, a feature-length documentary about the civilian victims of the firebombing of Tokyo, which is the most destructive air raid in history, and largely forgotten, both in Japan and particularly overseas.
勝つためにってね、頑張ったなと思って。頑張る前にやめとけば、東京空襲の受けなかったかな。
Well, actually, in the documentary Fog of War, it's made by an American director, Errol Morris, and it kind of, it's really focused on the firebombing of Tokyo. The scene that's about the bombing of Japan is really focused on Tokyo, and it shows a similar sized American city and the equivalent percentage of that city that was destroyed. It was really shocking for me because I'd already been living here for a few years at that stage, but I didn't really know anything about the firebombing. My film focuses on March 10th, 1945. It was a 2.5-hour air raid. More than 100,000 people were killed, a quarter of the city destroyed. Something like 1 million people made homeless. So the scale of the attack is really astonishing. If you think about, people went to bed on the 9th, they woke up between 4 walls of fire, and by the morning, so much destruction.
火炎放射みたいな炎がバーッと入ってきたんですよね。だからここにいたら焼け死んじゃうから川へ入れって父がね、で階段から川へ降りたわけです。もう本当に助かるのと死ぬのとの紙一重ですからね。
When I asked friends and Japanese people around me about it, most people were like, oh yeah, there was a Tokyo air raid, wasn't there? But most people knew nothing more than the most basic facts. In fact, a lot of people couldn't say how many people had died, or how much destruction was, or even when it was.
もう子供なんて信用しないですよね。空襲なんてないよ。どこにあったのなんて言ってますね。
They were all, they were all physically very small people. Because they were old and they grew up on like wartime rations and they didn't have a lot of nutrition. They were physically quite small people, but incredibly strong in their sense of self. I think having rebuilt their lives after all this trauma. The other thing about choosing these characters is the idea of passing on memory, I think, is the central theme of the film, and each of them was a kind of memory activist in a different way. There was one scene on the 71st anniversary in Morishita Gochome, and Mr. Tsukiyama, one of the 3 main characters in our film, he was called upon to give a little speech. Every time he starts talking about that night, he goes back into that memory, and his voice starts to crack a little bit. He sounds emotional, I think the longer he talks, the more he's kind of overtaken by this feeling or this memory. This guy now is, at that time, 87 years old, and still, you know, the smallest trigger, and, you know, these old people are back in the middle of that trauma. They'll take to their graves, basically.
日本は国がね、犠牲者の数も名前も全然調べてない。
東京大空襲で10万人亡くなった方の中で、この町会だけが全員をまとめてお祭りしていいことをしたなと思って私も感じております。骨もないし形見もないし何もないから、お墓には大切にするってことは人間の務めじゃないんですかね。
This is a Tokyo-made film. It's a Tokyo story, and more than anything, I wanted it to be seen here. I want people to first of all understand what happened and the extent of what happened in terms of the damage and the death. And then, really, the other main part of the film is this ongoing kind of struggle to leave behind something, to learn from the past. And the fact that this struggle is not, that the governments of Japan and Tokyo are not really, they don't appear willing to do that. They appear to want to forget, or for this issue to fade away with the death of the last survivors. So I think really, for Japanese audiences, I guess, you know, if they are able to look at that and think about why, to ask themselves why. Citizens, you always get co-opted and dragged into something not of their own choosing, and they end up becoming the victims by and large. So I think that's really, I suppose, in the end, the message of the film, that we need to be mindful, we need to be vigilant, we need to hold our governments accountable, because ultimately it's the governments who will drag us into war or not. That's why I opened the film with a quote from Milan Kundera. The struggle of man against power is the struggle of memory against forgetting. And I think that's really, for me, the great lesson that I took away from making the film, that, you know, civilians are led into war by militaries, by governments. And in order for that not to be the case, we need to know, we need to remember, we need to learn from what happened before.